Welcome to Sorta and Savvy, the interview series with established Christian entrepreneurs talking about how their faith impacts their business and how their business impacts their faith. I'm your host, Shelly, founder of Faith X, which helps Christian entrepreneurs like yourself connect your faith in your business with confidence. Join us right now for a video chat style interview, like grabbing a virtual coffee with a Christian business mentor. Hi, okay, today's guest is Jeanette Johnson, and she is the author of Jay's Everyday Fashion and Faith. And she's also a full-time blogger. She writes about style on her popular blog, Jay's Everyday Fashion. In addition to blogging, she regularly appears on morning shows and does a host of public appearances and speaking engagements. And she and her husband live in Orlando. And when we say like popular blog, we're talking about one of the most followed American fashion blogs with a site that has more than 1 million unique followers every year. So that's pretty amazing. So thank you for being on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So when you emailed me, you said, oh yeah, I love talking about this topic of faith and business. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so it's been a little bit of a more recent development for me in the last couple of years. I've just gotten more and more interested in talking about specifically what I do for a living, but also just faith and business in general. There's actually a women's group that meets here in Orlando once a month that is about this topic, about combining the two. And the first time I went, which is about a year ago, I heard the founder of the group speak, and she said something that really stuck with me that I've been repeating a lot, which is, I used to not want my work friends to know about church, and I didn't want my church friends to know about work. And I thought, wow, that that really hits home. I think I was like that for a long time, and I made this sort of huge decision to step out and write this book about combining fashion, which is my career path, and faith. And it was really scary, but also really exciting. And so that's been my journey the last couple of years, has been like, this topic is on my mind. So I was really excited to hear from you and that you're talking about this subject. And it's definitely something that I'm passionate about. So.
Oh, well, thanks again for doing this and being willing to talk about it. Yeah. And I read your book. To be honest, it's not something that I would have picked up if I saw this in the store and I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of cool. But I'm really glad you sent it to me, and that was very generous of you. Thank you. I read it all. And I loved the book. So some of the questions that I asked you will be coming from this and things that you said in here, and applying it. You wrote it to people basically to combine that faith and fashion, but you touch on a lot of topics that were broader than that. So we'll be expanding those to faith and business or your life. So just so that you're ready for that, there's several questions we're going to be talking about from there. But one of the things that I wanted to pick up first is that you mentioned that this was a scary process to write this book. And at the very beginning of the book, and in your blog even, you say that you're the unlikely author. Can you speak more to that, about why did you feel like you were the unlikely author?
Yeah, it was funny. I was actually doing a radio interview, and the DJ said something similar about the front of the book. And she was saying, I just don't understand what these two even have to do with each other. And for me, with my faith, I just sort of feel like fashion is a little bit vain, and I don't know why I would really want to read a book about it. But I said, no, that's my story too. So I grew up in rural Kansas and just was not around the arts really, or definitely not fashion. And it's just not something I ever paid attention to. I felt like my faith taught me to care deeply about those around me and to use, my money and my resources for things like that and charity. And it just isn't something I would have spent much time on. But in my early 20s, I moved to Boston, and I realized that my sort of minimalism type fashion was actually getting in the way. I lost out on a job opportunity because I was too frugal to buy the proper suit, and I had this like string of embarrassing stories. And once I did land a job, I just found myself underdressed a lot. I just felt like a teenager in a room full of adults, and I felt like it was affecting my ability to do my job well. And so I set a clothing budget to basically get myself to spend the money that I needed to on clothes. And within that budget, it just completely changed my world. I mean, I realized, wow, I really enjoy this. And that was a little bit freaky because you're thinking, this is the forbidden fruit, you know, and why do I love this so much? And it just sort of kept going from there to a few years later, starting a blog. And I think somewhere in my head, there was always sort of this push and pull of the fashion and the faith. Like, can these two things really exist? And how can they exist? And I used to really think that they couldn't be harmonious for some reason. And it's not like anyone really ever told me that, or I was shamed about it. I just had that impression, just even reading the Bible on my own. And certainly, I mean, fashion can be bad. Don't get me wrong. Anything can. I mean, you can make an idol out of anything. But I just think that this is a subject that has always been sort of questionable to me. Like, how can these things really exist? And so even doing fashion as a career, which is kind of funny how it really, I always joke, I got pushed into being an entrepreneur. I went kicking and screaming because I basically wound up monetizing my blog because I couldn't find a job during the recession. And it's like this, you know, lemonade story from Lemons. And I just, you know, found myself like, wow, I'm doing this as a career now. And I went from not even thinking it was okay really to shop, and how did I get here? And so I think coming out with that story and being bold about, you know, I used to be really, really minimalist, and this is why I changed my mind. And here's what I think the Bible says. It's just, for me anyways, the way I grew up is kind of a bold thing to say. You know, as I don't think there's a lot out there that exists that is sort of taking this stance on fashion and faith of saying, I don't think that they have to be as divided as we think they do. You know, I think that there's so much proof in the Bible, and even just in the way a woman is made, that it makes sense that we want to be beautiful and that we want to be surrounded by beautiful things. And I think, unfortunately, that gets twisted around sometimes to be something that's a little more legalistic, if you will, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. So that's, even now as I'm saying this, it's hard to say out loud, you know, because it's going sort of against the status quo of what I was raised with. And no matter what those messages are in your childhood, it's difficult to decide later as an adult, like, I'm going to go in a little bit of a different direction, you know, even if it's not extreme, because the book is not extreme at all. It's very based in the Bible, and, you know, it's thought provoking, but it's not controversial, I would say. I don't think it is. I think some people would think it is, but
right.
Yeah.
And like you said, right, you mentioned several times in the book, you've mentioned on your blog that there are different perspectives of, like, for example, what is modest, or what it means to be living out your faith in the way that you approach your fashion, or any number of things, right? Like, somebody told me one time that there was, like, however many people say that they're Christians, there's that many numbers of what it means to be a Christian and how to live that out. So
Yes.
it's, I was just kind of like, oh yeah, that every time that I would like flip the page and you're like, and then this might offend some of you, but you know, this is how I come to like the middle of it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. And I actually had somebody give some really great feedback about the book, where they said that, you know, they're really conservative Christian, and they weren't really sure that they completely vibed with everything in the book, and that, but it was a nice comment. They were saying that they were actually going to use it in their ministry to counsel women. But I wrote back to them and I said, you know, ultimately I feel like women are under so much pressure with their appearance, and we hear it from all sides. You know, mainstream media wants to tell us one thing. We feel like our faith tells us another, or maybe the fair trade movement tells us another. I mean, there's just all this pressure. And I really wanted the book to make you think and not tell you what to think. So I play devil's advocate a lot in the book. I tell you one extreme story and another, and then I kind of just say, you decide, you know, versus this is what you have to think. And I think even just that approach, even though that's kind of a soft approach, can be a little bit uncomfortable, because I think we often want our faith to put things in black and white for us and tell us exactly what we should think about plastic surgery, for example. And I don't think it's that simple. And so I think it's, hey, you decide for yourself. But I think what she was really feeling was just, you don't really tell us, I can't really pinpoint what you believe, and that makes me uncomfortable. And I'm like, I'm fine with that. I don't need you to know what I believe necessarily. It's not about me. It's about your journey and what you want to do. So.
Yeah, and so tell me a little bit about that more in terms of the entrepreneur side of things, because it does echo a lot of things we hear in the entrepreneurial world and from entrepreneur leaders, like, oh, you got to find your own path, you got to do your own thing, right? There's a lot of other people telling you what to do, but ultimately you're going to have to figure that out for yourself. So can you tell me a little bit about how that's looked in your business side of things?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because somebody just asked me in an interview a couple of weeks ago, like, what I think my number one thing I bring to the world is, and I was like, whoa, that's a big question. But the first thing that came out of my mouth was that I'm really good at going against the status quo, and being rebellious in kind of like a respectful way. Because my business idea in 2010, when I started Jay's Everyday Fashion, was essentially to go against the status quo. I loved fashion magazines. I thought they were great. But at the end of the day, I just felt like, why aren't we talking about the really practical side of fashion? And again, this is 2010. Things were so different then. There was not a crop of budget-friendly fashion blogs. I'd never seen one in my life. There was only a couple blogs I knew of, and they both looked like Vogue. And I thought, here's an opportunity for us to speak about these everyday things and to kind of find balance. And that, for me, did come from my faith, because I wasn't buying into this sort of pressure that you get from mainstream media that there's one specific ideal of beauty and we should, kill ourselves to achieve it, and we should do everything we possibly can. Like, I've never really believed that because of my faith. And so everything that I did came from that place. It was meant to be a little bit rebellious against mainstream fashion because of who I was and what I believed. And while it was never been a Christian fashion blog, it's a blog. I blog and I'm a Christian, right? And so my faith and my values come out in it, but it didn't need to be any specific faith. It was just saying, hey, let's look at fashion from a different perspective. And so, that absolutely applies in being an entrepreneur, because I always say the best advice I can give someone is, don't go out and reinvent the Kleenex. Whether you're starting a blog or any business idea, come up with something that you feel like is missing. So many times I feel like people say, I'm going to start a blog and it's going to be just like so-and-so's. And I'm like, find the hole and then fill it. Like, find what you're dying to see and that you're missing, and then do that. And that, is one of my best tips. And that's kind of what I feel like I did then. And I'm also a little bit doing now with the book, is I wanted to see this conversation about fashion and faith from kind of a different perspective. And so I was like, well, I guess I'll put it out there.
But it wasn't like, when you said that, like, oh, I guess I'll put it out there, that decision didn't come immediately, right? Like, somebody had approached you about this and then you decided later, and there was a little bit of an in-between, right?
There was an immediate, no way am I doing that. That's the craziest idea I've ever heard. I had a publisher reach out directly and said, will you write a book about this? And I just thought, this is literally one of the scariest subjects I could think of. It's kind of the little bit of guilt that sits with me all the time. Like the quote I gave at the beginning, you didn't want your church friends to know about work necessarily. And, it just made me feel uncomfortable. So I was like, I don't want to go talk about that. I'm like, I like to just keep the two separate as possible for the most part, and just, go on with my life. And within like 2 weeks though, could see the vision and could see my journey unfolding and how it all just made sense. I thought, this is my story. I am a little uncomfortable. And I actually think writing a book about something that makes you a little uncomfortable is great advice, because I was learning and I was growing and I was healing literally as I was writing it. It was a very emotional experience to write this book. And I think that you can feel that when you read it a little bit, like you're sort of exploring with me and learning with me. And it's really cool, rather than, I don't think every book has to be, I'm a total expert on this and here you go. It's more of a journey that you're taking with the author. And so yeah, it did take some convincing. It was an instant no, and then I got really excited about it in a couple of weeks. And then for the next year and a half, because it takes a while, obviously, for a book to be completed, and the traditional publishing model takes a while. I'm pretty sure at every step along the way, I sort of questioned whether I was really doing this. I had to like recommit myself every step of the way because I was just feeling really nervous about it. But yeah.
So how does this, thanks for sharing that, number one. But how does that play into the same feelings that maybe you had as a reluctant entrepreneur? You said you were dragged into it because you couldn't find a job. Normally people who choose something have a little bit different feelings than somebody who's like, well, I guess I'll do it because somebody either approached me or like this was the only option. Like, how similar are those?
Well, and I'm glad you said that because, someone definitely approached me. There's still so much effort that has to take place on my end, because the next step was I actually went to my agent and we wrote a proposal and sent it to all of the publishers, and we wound up going with a different one mutually. It was a better fit. And so for me, it was like, this is scary, but I'm going to say yes to at least trying the next step. And I swear about half of me hoped that no one would pick up the book so that I didn't have to write it. But I was like, I feel like I at least need to try it. I've been given the idea. It does seem like something that makes sense, even though it's scary. And I'm going to go for it, So it's the same as if someone gives you that idea, but you're still the one that has to go out and start the business, and even if it's scary, I still am the one that sat down and wrote it and showed up. And, because I always say courage is not having fear, right? It's deciding to do it anyway, which was the case. So it was pushing through that every day and just recommitting myself, like I said, every day. And yeah, just one step at a time.
Yeah, showing up and being committed through the next step.
Yeah,
I like that. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about how you've seen God's faithfulness throughout either the book writing process or in your business in general. Do you have examples or stories of that?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I just think the whole story of the last 7.5 years is just, it sounds, even when I hear it, I'm like, this just sounds too good. Like there's just so many things that have been amazing. The first year of blogging, I was working full time and was just doing it as a passion project. It was successful, the blog, but I didn't even think about monetizing it or anything like that. And then when I lost my job and couldn't find another one, I started monetizing it, sort of because I felt like I didn't know what else to do. And within a year, it was making all this money. And I was like, this is a surprise. I never thought this was even a thing or possible with blogging. And then sort of the next 5 years were completely just overwhelmed with opportunities and being given jobs with amazing brands, fashion brands that we partner with, and sponsored posts. And I mean, it's been really cool. And there's just no way that wasn't God, because I don't know what else it would be. It's just been really cool, really phenomenal experience. I mean, who doesn't want that to be their story? So what's been neat about the book and this sort of phase is that I really enjoyed sort of, instead of just being reactionary to everything that's going on, is saying, what do I want my career to look like? What do I want to be using this platform and this influence, if you will, for? And it was to start this conversation. I want to push something new. And, the book is definitely something that I'm having to market, that I'm having to push. And it's been great because it's refreshing to not just have it magically, fall into place, which isn't true with my blog either. I mean, it was 2 years of pushing really hard before that happened. But then it was like 5 years of amazingness. So I guess I've lived it before, and maybe I'm using that as my is my inspiration now of hoping to get the book to start, blossoming and really getting out there. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. And you touched on this too, is that it took a little while, and that was one of the things I was noticing on your blog. You have a section for like media or partnerships and that kind of thing, and you list some of the things that you've done or the places you've been featured, and you have the dates next to them, which I thought was really interesting, because at first I was just going like, oh wow, this person, she's so impressive, like, oh my gosh. And then I was like, wow, like you've done everything, I can't believe we're talking. But then I was like, oh look, there's dates. And I kind of like went through in my head, I was like, oh, this didn't all just like boom happen in 1 year or whatever, right? This is a process. And yeah, can you tell me a little bit about, you said those first 2 years of like working really hard. I would imagine that you didn't feel like you were in the place that you exactly wished your blog was necessarily. Like, how there's always a little bit tension, like where you are and where you want to be, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell me about having that patience to like wait for that gap to be closed a little bit and still having the hope that motivates you to work more?
Yeah. So for the first year that I was blogging, my background's actually in marketing. So I worked actually in public television and marketing when I was first started blogging. And I had all these really cool hacks that are not possible anymore, unfortunately, on Facebook to get people to follow the blog. And I used to spend like an hour a day, and I was working full time at my regular job, but I would spend like an hour a day just doing those hacks on Facebook to get more people to read it. So, and also to reach out to boutiques and things that had about the same number of Facebook followers as me, and we would partner together we would just trade, shout out for shout out, or I'd partner with a blogger or whatever that looked like. So the whole first year was really focused on getting the word out there. And then after that, it turned into a year of trying to figure out how to monetize. So from the time that I sat down and Googled how do you monetize a blog, it took a year to find the right tools, to figure out how to use them well. I mean, it's kind of funny because I think about those first 2 years and how much money is left on the table, like I could have been making. It's really interesting. Because I was just using automated programs like affiliate links and things like that. So all of that, the first 2 years I didn't have. But it was tough. I mean, it took an entire year. And this whole time, these first 2 years of blogging, I'm blogging 7 days a week, not getting paid for it at all. I think that's what people forget is like, there are other reasons why people blog, and you can't just show up on day one and expect there to be a ton of people reading or to make money from it without doing your homework and just trying a lot of things first. And I think for me, what kept me going is there's this saying I love that every entrepreneur has two things in common. They want to change the world, and they're just crazy enough to believe they can do it. And that describes me to a T. And what I wanted to change about the world was making fashion journalism more inclusive and more down to earth and positive and uplifting, and all these wonderful adjectives. And I was just crazy enough to believe that I could move the needle just a little bit if I put it out there and got it in the right people's hands, and just worked really, really hard, for 2 years, and did not see those fruits for a while. But then, like I said, it was amazing after that. So worth it.
Yeah.
Worth it. Totally.
Your 2 year overnight success.
Yeah, no, exactly. I always say there's just no such thing. And then another thing I always say, and every time I speak about blogging or business, is that I think that a lot of times people have this impression that, oh, what it must feel like to have made it. I don't know if you watched the Super Bowl last night. I didn't watch a ton of it, but I did see this moment where they sacked Tom Brady, and he was on a bench, and he just looked so depressed because he was pretty sure that they were going to lose. And this is a man who's won more Super Bowls, I think, than anyone as a quarterback, or he's up there. See how much I know about football. Not a lot. But you're thinking, oh, woe is me, Tom Brady, you've accomplished so much. Think of all the people who would love to be in that position. But at the end of the day, success doesn't feel like, oh, I've made it, I can relax. It feels like you're climbing a mountain every single day. And I would say occasionally you might win an award or get, something really cool happens, like a book comes out, and you'll take a moment and look around and be like, wow, I'm up here really high. This is so cool. But then what do? You start climbing again. It's never, and the trick is to make sure that it doesn't become this thing where it's never enough, where it's like unhealthily never enough. But in some ways it doesn't end, there's not like a position where maybe if you're Beyonce, she may not have to try anymore. I'm not sure because she's Queen Bey, but I think most of the time it just feels like climbing a mountain, and it's very humbling. It's not this like awesome feeling that you're on vacation every day for sure.
Yeah. And I think there is that, like you said, like bloggers, oh, it's just so easy, or like they just open their blog and they have money pouring in. But even entrepreneurs in general, I think there is some concept of like, either it's just completely hard and you're always working and never get any money and you have to go back to a regular job, or it's like you don't work at all, you sell your thing and you're rich like overnight. Yeah. And there's like nothing in between. So you touched on this a little bit, and maybe you don't have anything else to say and we can just go on to the next question. That's totally fine. But is there anything else that you remind yourself of, like if you do feel those kind of extremes or like any tension around that, are there little things that you tell yourself about that process or where you are and what you're doing?
Just reminding myself that it's really the journey, not the destination, because that is cheesy, but it's very true. I don't know. I always just think of things as a day at a time. I can get, just like anybody else, frustrated with the long term or the vision or not knowing where things are going. And it's just showing up, doing the best you can, trying to listen to your intuition and, go for those, not let fear, stop you from doing things like write the scary book. That I ultimately think was a good idea and is a good idea. It just is, a little bit uncomfortable, but being comfortable might actually be a good guide, so it's, I think I really just picture the climbing a mountain scenario a lot of the times.
Yeah. It's a good metaphor. Yeah. It really seems to fit. Like you don't want to just get there and stop and then that's it, right?
Well, and if you're looking at someone else, which I don't recommend, and sort of saying, oh, I wish I had that success. Even if they are at a higher summit or ridge than you are, it looks the same to them. They still are climbing a mountain. So it's like, we're not all that different as it seems, and if you're good and you're happy where you are and you've got, the bulk of your needs taken care of, that's all we can really ask for. And that's another way that faith absolutely plays into it, because it's having faith, that you're going to be taken care of, and realizing that you're so fortunate, to be living in this country even, there's just so many things to consider and to be thankful for. So.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'm trying to figure out where to go now, whether I'm going to pick up something that you said so much that was really valuable. I'm just like reading my notes now and seeing what I want to ask you next. Okay, here's one that really stood out to me. You had mentioned way early on that you had noticed that not spending money and being too frugal was starting to hold you back from the things that you wanted. And then ultimately, like if you think about what you have now, like ultimately where God was leading you, right? So can you speak a little bit to maybe the Christian entrepreneurs who feel uncomfortable spending money on their business? Because this is something that I sense a lot in as Christians, especially when they're just starting out, or maybe they're going a little bit and they've been using maybe free tools or just kind of like, do it yourself stuff. And then now they're hitting a place where maybe they're getting to this point where they might need to start spending a little bit of money, but they're uncomfortable with it. Can you, what advice would you have for them in that scenario?
Oh, It's tough because my experience with being an entrepreneur is so limited to being a fashion blogger. And I think the reason blogging is such a attractive option for entrepreneurs is because there's no real investment for the most part. If you have a computer already and the basic gear, there's a really low barrier to entry. So it's very popular for that reason. And so I never had to make that scary decision of like, am I going to invest money into a business? I mean, there's been small things along the way, like a different camera or something, but that was being paid for, by the profits of the blog. And it's always had something crazy, like a 95% profit margin, because again, there's just not that much that goes into it. So I've joked before that I'm a baby entrepreneur because I don't have to deal with things like inventory and overhead. I mean, there's just like these, I love shows like The Profit and Shark Tank. And I was just like, there's a whole other level of entrepreneurship that I don't know about, I would love to someday, but for now, for me, the spending money on clothing was different than it would be as a regular business expense, because it was more about all the ways that fashion really is serious and it matters. Like it matters at work and nonverbal communication and taking care of yourself and self-care. I mean, there's all these self-esteem. I mean, there's all these like deeper questions that I go through in the book about specifically spending money on clothes, which is really something that anyone who wears clothes, which is most of us, has to go through and decide, but it's more specific to clothes, I'd say, than business.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll switch a little bit. Something that was in your book, was about how you have to do your own art as an expression of worship in the worship that God has put in you specifically to do. And I know you just said like, oh, well, you're not like a typical entrepreneur in that sense, but even entrepreneur, right? There are a lot of different ways to be a freelancer, an entrepreneur, solopreneur, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of different ways that people are in business without this traditional employer sense. So how does doing your own art kind of play into those different areas of like how we set up our business, how we market our business? I mean, with your background in marketing and communications, like what are some questions that we can think about maybe in terms of like your own art and like really living into who God has made you to be in your business specifically?
Yeah, I mean, there's a quote that I put in the book, which I also quote every time I speak, because it's one of my favorite books. It's called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. And he asks, of any activity on earth, ask yourself, if I were the last person on earth, would I still be doing this? And I think that is one of those quotes that totally meshes faith and our career, because the things that you were just born to do and that were put there in your heart from a very young age are those things that you would be doing. He says, Arnold Schwarzenegger would still be lifting weights and Stevie Wonder would still be playing the piano, and I would be running around looting department stores and just making things just for fun, with no one around to impress. It's just what I love to do. And I think that speaks to our faith and just sort of embracing what those passions are that were put there and how we're all made so differently and in his image. And it's just a really cool, like, spiritual experience, but it also bodes really well for work because, I gave an entire keynote speech about blogging where I basically just said, you have to love it that much or there's just no reason to be doing it at all. Like, you have to be willing to do it when no one's paying attention, when no one's watching, just for the sake of loving it. And that is the number one key to success, is just to find whatever it is. And it may not be specifically blogging. I think blogging is usually more the medium to share that love. So, you can be loving quilting or food or whatever. And the blogging is just the way that you share what you love. But ultimately it's, the art that you're doing that you love, and it's what keeps you going. I'm like anybody else, I'm sure there have been days that I've wanted to quit over and over again, but at the end of the day, I'm always like, I'm not going to stop putting together outfits. The only thing that's maybe up for negotiation is blogging about it, but that almost feels like the easiest step. I'm going to be doing, the art, the hard part. So might as well keep sharing it too,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like you said, this is a medium, like a sharing expression of your art. And when we share something, I mean, there's a level of vulnerability in that, especially when you're sharing it online, I think. And you did mention a little bit in your book about this, like people kind of feel like they have the right to say something about you and like to make like meaningful statements into your life just because of a picture that they saw or something like that. And so again, how do we as Christians, and you did touch a little bit about this in your book, and so feel free to like just be like, oh, it's in my book, and I'll just link the book and that'll be that. But yeah, go ahead. But I was wondering if you could expand that or like give maybe an example that's not in your book for those of people who have already read it or maybe are going to pick it up. Give an example of how you approach a situation where you get criticism, and it's not necessarily helpful criticism that where, okay, this is customer that we might want to like actually listen to the feedback, but where it's just that kind of like, you can't do this or you shouldn't do this. Because I think a lot of entrepreneurs face that too, both from within the church and outside. So.
Yeah. Well, so, putting pictures of my outfits on the internet that can never be deleted, and my poor future children are going to be like, why did you do this to us? Is one level of vulnerability. And I seem to have just been born without the gene that cares about, I just don't mind making a fool of myself at all. And I think that's partly why people like to read, because I just don't have any airs about me in that way. But I think that writing this book was like a whole nother level of vulnerability. And I had a friend share some really wise advice that I will repeat now, which is, he said, you just need to look in the mirror and ask God to show you how he sees you. And he said, you hear all these voices and all this noise, and all of us do. It doesn't have to be through social media. It can be our friends and family or coworkers. And at the end of the day, it just only matters what God thinks of us, and it's going back to, how was I made and who am I and where does my even true beauty, which I cover extensively in the book, like where does my beauty come from? But where does my anything come from? Where does this desire to create outfits come from? And why do I do it? And whose approval really matters? And again, I mean, this is a great question because it goes back to why faith is so important in any job, but definitely in the one that I'm doing. I mean, it could be so easy to get lost in all those voices, but if you have faith and you know who you are in Christ and you know where you come from, and it's that Casting Crowns songs, I'll choose to listen and believe the voice of truth. I would just take my friend's advice, look in the mirror and ask God to show you how he sees you.
Okay, thank you. That is wise advice.
It is. I know, I wrote that down. I was like, hold that thought. I'm getting out my phone. Writing that down. Need to know. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm trying to figure out where I want to go next, because we're coming up to the end-ish of our time. Yeah. So, and I have a couple of things that I end with always. So I'm like, okay, 1 or 2 questions left. Can you speak a little bit about creativity? And because you mentioned a little bit about that, like, oh, you love this creative process, you like to create, you like to pull things together, it is your art, you very much approach it as art. And there are a lot of entrepreneurs who approach what they do as their art. And so creativity is a really big topic when it comes to thinking of new ideas and thinking about ways to serve in some way that hasn't been done before, is uniquely you, right? How much does your faith play into the creative aspect of your art?
Yeah, so interestingly, I stumbled upon a TED Talk by Elizabeth Gilbert like really early on with blogging that just totally blew my mind and has really been sort of the way that I view creativity and faith kind of combined together. And interestingly, it is a viewpoint that lots of people share. Secular faith, everyone seems to believe in this, basically like a being that gives you your ideas versus them coming from yourself. And so in this TED Talk about creativity, I highly recommend if you haven't seen it. It's one of, I think, the most watched TED Talks because it basically takes the pressure off of the person that's creating to feel like you have to keep coming up with new, fashion ideas. And then it also is great because you definitely shouldn't be taking too much credit for it either. It's just this great sort of nonchalant relationship with creativity. But for me, I really believe that it is God and it's the Holy Spirit. Some people believe it's a different kind of being or whatever, depending on their faith. But for me, there's this community almost, or this communion that happens, and it's a spiritual experience. And I had never quite experienced anything like that before. I mean, I was on a path for sure I set the clothing budget. I started to realize that I liked fashion. I liked it enough to start a blog. But my journey wasn't over from there. I mean, it's not like I had it figured out on day one of blogging. It was almost learning every day as I went, wow, now I'm seeing it as an art form. I don't think I saw it as an art form when I started. I saw it as more of a practical thing that I kind of enjoyed. But as it became my career and I needed to come up with more and more ideas, and I saw that TED Talk, I just thought, wow, this is really cool. And I started to put on praise and worship and really get into these brainstorming sessions where I would feel like I could feel God's presence. And it feels like, I know this probably sounds crazy, but even secular people believe this. So it can't be that crazy because it says in, I believe it's Exodus, that the Holy Spirit enters workers who are making all of these arts and crafts. Basically, and one of the things they're making is clothes, but they're making all these beautiful things. And I totally think that happens in the creative process. And I think it's why so many people love creativity. And I think it's also why it can drive some people crazy, because sometimes I feel like you show up and it doesn't happen that way. It's not this like perfect, it's the same every time. But that's the same with any time, our prayer time, praise and worship. I mean, it's always a little bit different every time. And I feel like the creative process is like that too. But I feel like it's just expanded and enriched my relationship and my time, my personal time with God by doing fashion, which sounds crazy, I know. But that's at the end of my book, I come to the conclusion that if anything, clothing has not taken me farther away from God and my faith. It's brought me closer to Him because of things like that, because of the creative process where I feel like it truly is this magical time. And I wouldn't trade that for the world. So.
Yeah. And as an expression, I mean, like you were saying, it's an expression of who you are as worship to your Creator. And worship is bringing us closer to God, right? So if you're approaching it that way, it would make sense.
Yeah. And I think that the part we have trouble with fashion is that it's something, the canvas is usually our own bodies. And so there's this thought that it must be vanity or it must be about the person wearing it. And I think that for a lot of people, there's enough detachment. I know for me, it really has nothing to do with it at all. I don't even need to be wearing it. I mean, I'm out in public in workout gear as much as the next person. It's not a matter of, I have to look a certain way. It truly is. I just really enjoy mixing fabrics and accessories and shapes and all of these things. And it's the process, really, that's the beautiful thing. It's literally just the coming up with it. I don't even need to ever wear it. I just love the process of it. And that's the spiritual part. And the fact that it's, your body's the canvas. Maybe it gets mixed up into vanity at some point. There's probably a line there, but most of the time it just feels very detached in that way. And it truly is just an art form, and I just happen to be the canvas. So, which is honestly more embarrassing half the time than it is fun. So I'm not really sure how vain that can be if you're like uncomfortable about it, but
yeah. Well, and it's like you said earlier, right? About doing the uncomfortable thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. The thing that makes you a little bit afraid just because you kind of feel like, well, this is the direction I'm headed, so I'm just going to do it anyway.
Yeah. I say in the chapter about fashion being a calling as a Christian that I've heard so many people say, that being a fashion blogger has got to be the most vain thing in the whole world. And, everyone's different, but for me, I feel like you have to be just humble enough to not care that you've all these pictures of you on the internet. I mean, I don't think I look fabulous really in any of them, and people are going to make fun of them no matter what they look like. So you've got to be just willing to, in my opinion, deal with that part of it so that you can share ultimately the outfit idea and the inspiration in general to just, treat fashion as your art form and go have fun with it and all the things I like to share sort of spiritually along with the outfit idea. It just doesn't always seem to me like it is the most vain job in the world because it's uncomfortable and you have to push through that and you have to decide, okay, I'm going to be okay with looking silly in this. And especially the outfit fails that I post, and like the time I used a Hostess cupcake as my inspiration for an outfit. I like to joke around and, make it lighthearted, but
yeah. And I mean, you mentioned a couple of times the things that you're uncomfortable with. You don't always do it perfectly. You mentioned in your book that failure is a part of the process, that you want to make that more okay. How do you think, as Christian entrepreneurs or freelancers or whatever, how do you think we do as far as like dealing with failure in our businesses and in our faith?
It's so tough, but I mean, there's so many verses in the Bible that say that all of us sin and all of us fall short. And I think that's the sort of line in Christianity where you want to be like God, but we aren't God. He's the only one that's perfect. And, in some ways, when we strive to be too perfect, we're making it about us in a way that isn't necessary. And we're not fully accepting the gift of grace or being okay with the fact that we need it. It's just, we live in a broken world and we're not perfect. And I think accepting that and being okay with that is part of the journey.
Thanks. All right. So we have a little bit of a speed round if you're ready. Okay. So just a warning, they're a little harder than like your favorite snack type of speed rounds. Okay, so one thing that you wish Christians knew about entrepreneurship or business.
Specifically that Christians knew about entrepreneurship. Wait, people that are entrepreneurs or that are just looking at us?
Oh, both, if you have a different answer.
Gosh. Well, if you're doing it, I would say invite God in and let him number your steps as early on as possible. I think I would have given myself that advice, which is why I give it to you now. So I would have viewed it as a partnership with God from day one and just relied on him to sort of decide the next step. And for people that are on the outside looking in, I don't know, that we're not all just sitting around at home and not doing anything. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So what is the best advice you've ever received?
Oh, I have no idea. I feel like I already shared all my favorites.
I think you did, so that's okay. We can skip that one.
I would always usually say Stephen Pressfield there. The quote that I shared about of any activity, ask yourself, would I be doing this? Because even now, once you have I have like my baseline career figured out, if you will, there's still a lot of decisions about what to do next. And so like even deciding to write this book, I had to ask myself that question, is this what I would want to be doing? absolutely. So do it, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. What is your favorite part about being both a Christian and an entrepreneur?
Like both together?
Mm-hmm, both together.
One thing. Okay. Gosh, that you have this amazing partner in business. It does not get any better. And, you know, how he interacts is different from business to business, but it is like the ultimate secret weapon as an entrepreneur.
Yeah. What's your most challenging part about being both a Christian and an entrepreneur?
Other Christians thinking that your particular flavor of entrepreneurship is not okay.
Mm-hmm.
That being, you know, in the arts to an extent, but also being in like the secular arts. Like I think a lot of times people think, like Lecrae is a good example. He's a rapper who is Christian versus being a Christian rapper. And I feel like there's a lot of pressure a lot of times, like you're not really doing it if you're not including a Bible verse every day with your outfit, and just sort of questioning a lot of decisions you're making in that realm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds tough.
Mm-hmm.
What is one verse that's standing out to you right now?
For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future, which is like everyone's favorite verse, but that's okay. That's the one that came to mind first. So,
okay.
And it's a good one for sure.
It is a good one. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Just for fun, what's your favorite cliche phrase that Christian entrepreneurs say?
Oh, first of all, I need to be hanging out with more Christian entrepreneurs. Actually, I do know a bunch of them now that I think of it. What do they say? When God closes a door, he opens a window. That one people say that a lot, right?
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, you made it to the speed round. That was like, woo. Yeah, one of the world's harder but slower speed rounds. So I feel like it all evens out.
Take me a minute.
And then just a couple of questions in closing, give you a chance to talk about a project that you're working on that you're really excited about and want to share with the viewers.
I don't know if I can talk about the things I'm working on yet because I always feel like nervous to talk about things before they really happen, but I have some pretty cool ideas. I don't know how much I want to say here about expanding the book and sort of the ideas that it tackles into even potentially a nonprofit or some kind of ministry or something along those lines that I'm just so excited about. So that's one thing. But ultimately, it's in God's hands. That's another one we could say, the entrepreneurs say. Because it really is. I never get to, into one thing because I'm open to whatever is coming. So just trying to get the book rolling and get people to understand what it's about. I think you mentioned that the cover was, everything you said about the cover was like completely on point. That's the feedback I'm getting. I think people are misunderstanding and thinking that it's fashion advice from the Bible or something versus a philosophical discussion about, the theology of fashion and faith. So I'm working on those challenges right now is the main focus. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so where can people get your book?
The best place is just on Amazon. There's an ebook, an audiobook, and the soft cover that you're holding, and you can get all of those on Amazon.
Okay. And that is, again, Jay's Everyday Fashion and Faith, Personal Style with a Purpose. Mm-hmm. So that's there.
It's not fashion advice, I promise.
Yeah, not fashion advice. And I can vouch, I read it. It's not fashion advice. And the interesting thing is, I didn't think it was fashion advice either based on this, but I did think that it was going to be more about, like, less applicable to my life because I don't feel like I'm, like, there where I'm thinking about.
Totally.
I just wouldn't have appealed to me. But I'm glad I read it because I really learned a lot from it. Yeah. So, yeah. So even, viewers, even if you're not quite sure, like, go to Amazon, check it out, see what people are saying. It might be interesting to you, even if you don't think it would be. Yes. So,
well, ultimately, all of us have to get dressed every day. And there is a battle around a woman's appearance every day, whether we realize it or not. And it just can't hurt to think about all of these things like body image and finances. And I mean, they're things that you have to make a decision. Like you have to decide how much money you're going to spend on fashion. So it's good, like girl talk book. I feel like it's a good conversation starter between friends about things that we all have to decide. So it's not, for people who just love fashion. Cause I know
Right.
I love it in a way that's just weird. I know everyone does not look at it as an art form. And I've been there too, where a lot of days it's just a nuisance, to be honest. And I don't feel like getting dressed. And that's fine. But it really is for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you. And then the last question is there anything you thought I would be asking you that I didn't, or something else you really want to say, like your final thought that you want to leave the viewers with?
No, I think you were an excellent interviewer, and I said everything I would want to say, I think.
Okay.
No, I do. I think I got to share lots of great nuggets in there. So thank you again for having me.
Well, thanks again for being on the show. And everybody watching, thank you for your time. Thank you for your interest, for sticking around this long. And then go check out the book. It's a really great book. Thank you for your time, Jeanette J. She can be found on her blog, jayseverydayfashion.com.
Yeah.
And again, the book is here. And thank you, and we'll see you again next time.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye. Hey there. Thanks for watching this episode of Sword and Savvy. Be sure to comment with one thing that you liked best about this video, and check out the other episodes in this series. Also, if you have any suggestions for other people who you'd like to see on the show, drop their name in the comments and let me know some of the questions that you would ask them if you had the chance. See you soon.